Again, and we're at Sharp, Kentucky, and visiting in the home of Lake Riley. Lake and Leota live right on US 68, and it's a real pleasure to be visiting with you. Are you ready to begin and tell us about your father and mother, let's say?
Well, I guess so. My father was Lex Riley, and he was the oldest child of Commodore Riley, and there was 13. He was the oldest child and 13 children.
I believe your dad's 92, isn't he? We interviewed him not too long ago.
Yes, sir, that's right. And I wish I could have done mine before he done his, because I'm afraid I'm afraid he done a whole lot better than I'm going to be able to do. But anyway, Dad had 6 sisters and 6 brothers, I believe. I'm correct in that. Anyway, there's 13, and he's the oldest one, and there's about 5 that have already passed on. And of course, my mother was Oma Johnson, and her father was Frank Johnson, which was a brother to Uncle Marion Johnson and Uncle Ben Johnson, Uncle Alfred Johnson, and makes me akin to almost all of the Johnsons here in Marshall County, and no telling where all they're scattered to now.
Well, very good. Were you born in this part of the country?
Yes, sir. I was born right up the bottom road here from Sharp on a little branch there. Where Jim Engel lives now. And my dad bought that place, and his father had bought a farm all around that place where my dad had bought. And I growed up there till 1930. And I went to school down the road just 1 mile.
Now, what school was that?
Well, it's the McCain School, one-room school. And my first school teacher was Miss Mattie Morrison. And incidentally, she told me just a few years before she died, I visited her quite a bit and talked to her, that my father once schooled her at McCain.
That's a little bit unusual, isn't it, that you and your father both went to her?
Same teacher. That's kind of hard to realize, but the older people then, boys back in them days, went to school a lot longer than until they was a lot older than I was when I was in school. Mm-hmm. And Miss Mattie Morrison was my first school teacher at McCain, and then after I went to Curtis Griggs, who was later Curtis Morrison, Virgie, and Edith Thomason, Miss Ruth McCain, and Opal Tyree, and perhaps some more. But anyway, I started at McCain in the 8th grade and finished up there, and then we moved down to my grandpa Edwards' place, which is a little closer to Sharp, and I started the high school at Sharp, and I graduated at Sharp. And I believe the only 2 teachers that I can recall right now that the high school teachers that are living would be Mrs. Helen Gardner and Mr. Louis Green.
Mm-hmm. Well, now Green was there, and I believe when they changed the name of the team to Green Devils, it seems to me that Woodrow Hill told me that.
That could be correct. I don't know, because Mr. Louis was the basketball coach, but when I was there, they had to play on the dirt. They didn't have a gymnasium to play in, because I graduated in '36. The last year, the old 2-story weatherboarded high school and grade school building stood at Sharp.
Well, that building was right new then when Homer Holland and a group of boys won the state tournament in '38 then, wasn't it?
Yes, sir. That's right. And at that time, I believe there was a Bryant Holland, or Holland Bryant. I believe that's the way it was. Holland Bryant was a Commonwealth attorney, I think, either in this county, McCracken County. And
it was McCracken, but the judicial district then included Marshall in Judge Price's day and Holland Bryant's day.
Is that right?
Now, I remember, I don't remember when he began, but he was still serving during the time that I can recall.
Well, he was the commencement speaker, and I remember him making this statement, that there had only been at that time 2 schools west of the Tennessee River that had ever been champions in the state of Kentucky, and that was Sharp and Heath.
Heath in 29, Sharp in 38.
Is that, well, you can confirm that for me then. But I remember him making that statement. It stayed with me.
You know, you're a rare person. I want to give you some money after this is over. The reason, I have never met a person before that I recall that remembered anything the commencement speaker said.
Well,
Bill Powell did a column one time, I recall, and about that nobody ever remembered what the commencement speaker said.
Is that right?
And here you've done it.
Well, I can remember what a preacher said at one of the baccalaureate sermon the year I graduated. That is Ed Bashir's, preached at Mount Moriah.
Mm-hmm.
And he told a little story about a boy had gone off to college, and he came back home, and his father and mother were at the table, and the son was there, and his father had been a fishing, and he'd caught 2 fish, and they were not very large, and he had them fried whole, and they were both laying on the platter. Mm-hmm. And his father said, "Son," said, "are you learning anything at school?" And the son said, "Oh, yes, Father, I'm learning a lot." "Well," he said, "what could you give me a little demonstration of what you learned?" He said, "Yes." He said, "You see, there are 2 fish on that platter that you have on the table." And his father said, "Yes, there's 2 there." Well, he said, "I can prove to you there's 3. Well, he said, "Let's see, son." So he took his fork and he touched number 1. He said, "That's number 1." And then he touched the other fish and he said, "Now that's number 2. He says, 1 and 2 makes 3. Well, his father said, "Son, that's correct." So the father took his fork and he took that fish. He took number 1. He says, "Mother says you can eat number 1. And he said, "Then I'll eat number 2. And he said, "Son said you can have number 3. That's all I remember about the baccalaureate, sir.
Yeah, well, you got a lesson in counting anyway. Well, let's see. Did you have any brothers and sisters?
Oh, yes. I was, as my father was the oldest in his family, and I happened to be the oldest in my family. And then there was a brother that died, and he's less than 2 years old next to me, Wayne. And then there was Frank and, or rather Chloe, my sister, oldest sister, and then Frank and Lincoln and Pat, and then my youngest sister, Joyce. Mm-hmm. Mother died and buried the 3rd Sunday in August 1945 over at the Peck Cemetery, and my mother's mother was a Peck. So I'm not only kin to all the Johnsons, but all of the Pecks, and the country's full of Pecks around here.
Oh, my. Just like crabgrass, aren't they?
That's right.
Janie's got some Peck blood in her. You probably kin to my wife.
I'm kin to all of the Blumenbergs and the Pecks and the Johnsons and the Rileys and the Edwardses and whatnot.
Why, the Edwardses, you may be kin to me. My great-grandfather was an Edwards anyway. And, well, of course, my grandmother was, too.
Well, my great-grandfather on my father's side was an Edwards, and he was a blacksmith, an old-time blacksmith, and he did everything the hard ways, but he did it right. And he had a saying, I'll never forget my grandfather Edwards' saying. He said, if you wanted anything done said, hire a boy to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, if you wanted it half done, said, hire a man to do it. And he said, if you want it done right, do it yourself.
Yeah, oh boy. Well, I've heard part of that saying all of my lifetime, and I guess he had a good bit of truth in that. Now, you finished high school about, what you say, 36?
Yes, sir, 1936.
Well, now, those were pretty tough times. What did you start doing then?
Well, I got married, you see, and
where'd you meet your wife?
Oh, I met her over at Kalertown, and Kalertown is about halfway between Sharp and Possum Trot.
Not too far from Simpsonia, is it?
Oh no, you've got the wrong.
Oh,
that's Kaler.
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 I see.
But this is a little place over here at Mount Moriah Primitive Baptist Church. Used to be called Kalertown. Uncle Henry Kaler, one of the grand old men over there in that part of the country.
Well, I'm just learning things all the time.
That's called Kalertown.
Yeah. Okay.
And they used to have a ball game there every Saturday evening and every Sunday evening on Uncle Henry Kaler's farm right down there in front of the folks' cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I found Leota's over Kalertown, and she was Leota Folks.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam Folks is
I know where
girl.
The cemetery is.
Well, that's Folks territory, Folks country.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Willie Folks and
Shelby McCallum's wife is buried there.
Yes, sir, I believe that's right. She was a harper.
Mm-hmm.
And
there were harpers around on the ball clubs of Sharp. And
lots of them. And incidentally, my wife's mother was a harper. I was kin to Shelby's wife.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Little kin.
Yes, sir.
Them.
All right, so you got married at a very young age.
I got married my halfway junior year, and then I finished high school. I was out the rest of that year, and then maybe another year, I believe, year and a half, and then I went back and finished up high school in 36 after I was married.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was farming, living with my grandpa up on the bottom road on Chestnut Creek, and growing strawberries, tobacco, and corn, pigs, and cows. And you talk about it being hard times, it was very hard. I remember very well one year, and of course the way I got started, my father gave me a cow when me and Leota married, and when I moved to my grandfather's place, Frank Johnson, and her father gave her a cow, so we had 2 milk cows. And
that was valuable property.
Oh, we had milk, had butter, and no problem there. And we growed our hogs and our corn and had our chickens. And you lived without money. And that year, the best I remember, in 36, the tobacco crop bought $90. And I got half of it, and that was our income.
$45.
$45, but we had ham and eggs for breakfast, and hot biscuits, and cornbread, and butter, and beans that Leota can, and corn, and never missed a meal.
Mm-hmm.
But didn't have any money.
Yeah, I grew up in that similar background, at least.
But after that long, and about 40, 39, I guess, why, after farming about 4 or 5 years, well, we accumulated $100. And the old farm where Leota was, my wife was raised, was for sale. There's 70 acres in it.
Mm-hmm.
And we found out that we could buy it for $850.
Mm-hmm.
And I took that $100 and made a down payment and borrowed $750 from Mr. Bob Johnson, who lived up there on the bottom road. My daddy signed my note, and my grandpa Johnson signed my note, and he took a mortgage on the place. And everybody got their money, and nobody went broke.
Well, good. Did you have any children?
Oh, yes. Yes, we raised 3 boys.
Did they start coming fairly soon after?
Oh, yes, yes.
They were kind of scattered out for a while.
Martin and Galen, they were a couple of years apart, or something like that, and then.
Now, I've met both of them. Then you have a boy named James, don't you?
Yeah, James, he's a loner. We had 2 girls born after the first 2 boys, Martin and Galen, Bertha and Alveda. And then James is some 6 or 7 years younger than the youngest girl.
Now, Bertha made a nurse, didn't she?
She went to Murray and Owensboro, and graduated from the nurse's school and made an RN.
Mm-hmm.
And she married Wayne Harrell, who graduated from the University of Louisville and made an MD. And they Wayne went to Rome, Georgia, and went to work at the hospital there to serve his internship.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a nephew. My brother's boy had a plane, 4-passenger plane. And Wayne and Bertha and the children were going to get their vacation beginning Wednesday after Christmas. The rest of the doctors got theirs Wednesday before Christmas and had to come back then on Wednesday after Christmas. But Wayne and the rest of the doctors got started Wednesday after Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And my nephew flew my brother's plane down there. He was a student pilot and was picking up Bertha and Wayne and the 2 girls, little girls. The oldest one was, probably not 3 years old, I don't believe. And they was going to fly back then on Thursday. No, he went down on Tuesday. And they was flying back on Wednesday is the way it was after Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And they were supposed to get into Calvert City and have supper at Wayne's father and mother. And I went to church that night, and my brother Frank was at church, and they hadn't got in time, they just wasn't in that night, period. And so I'd look at Frank, and he'd look at me. And I called about 11 o'clock the hospital and asked about them and told them, I said, now, they haven't got in. They said, well, they left here and they're supposed to be on a vacation. And the little girl said, well, I'll send the police out to the airport. And I said, well, there'll be a Marshall County car there if they've gone. And she said, I'll call you back in a few minutes. And so she called me back in a few minutes and said, the car's at the airport. It's locked up. And that's all we can tell you. Well, I knew it was a hopeless case then, and that was the saddest experience I guess our family's ever had in our life.
Terrible tragedy for all those young people to die, and I know it was about this time of year.
Yes, sir. It be 21 years ago, Wednesday after Christmas. It happened Wednesday after Christmas in 1964. They all buried down here at Sharp at the cemetery back at the church, and we had their funeral at North Marshall High School, and it's estimated there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 people there. Mr. Lloyd Rudolph told me is the most respectful audience that he'd ever seen in his life.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a terrible strain on you and your wife, and of course you'll never really get over it. But I've written a history this year, and it's been published in the Jackson Purchase Historical Society concerning the Churches of Christ in Marshall County. Now, in digging through a lot of old records, I noticed where you'd preached at Benton back about 41 or somewhere in there. How did you get started in preaching?
Well, I can tell you, Ray, when I moved up on my grandpa's place up on the bottom road, why, I had gone to church back in the horse and buggy days at Oak Valley, and I knew all of the people at Oak Valley and had a great love for them. And then there was a man by the name of Hubert Armstrong. He was my neighbor, and I visited him, and of course at Oak Valley, and you know this family very well, Ezra Blumenberg family. And Ezra always seemed like as close to me as any brother I ever had in the flesh. We always worked together and helped one another, and our families growed up together, and we went to church a lot together, and so we'd go to Oak Valley to church for Sunday morning, then go down to Shop, which now is Maple Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I started going to church. And Ezra encouraged me, Uncle Bill Peck and Hubert Armstrong.
Somebody told me yesterday that said Hubert Armstrong was a great bass singer.
He was a great bass singer. He had a good voice. And he was a great worker in the church and studied his Bible. And I went to a lot of meetings, brush arbor meetings and tent meetings over at Griggstown, Brother Bob McGregor. And there was a man by the name of Irvin Johnson. He'd have on a new pair of overalls, and he could lead that singing, and he could pitch every song just right.
Yeah.
And so I started in 1938. Cletus Anderson, W.C. Anderson. He's a Marshall County boy, lives in Metropolis now.
Yeah, his mother at least one time lived in Hardin.
Yeah, that's right. I think his father may have died in Hardin. I'm not real sure about that. Mm-hmm. But W.C. had a good A model, and he wanted to study the Bible. And I made arrangements for him to pick me up, and he'd pick me up, and we'd go through Wango, Kentucky, and drive to Freed-Hardeman. And in Wingo, he'd pick up J.E. Choate, which now is Dr. Choate at David Lipscomb College.
I know him.
He's a wonderful man.
Mm-hmm.
And
he was on the debate team at Murray State when I was.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, you know him very well then.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I went to school with him. He married Stanley Jones's daughter, who also, Stanley Jones was a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And he conducted a meeting down there on the bottom road in a tent, and I remember going to that. But I went to Freed-Hardeman in 1938, and I attended the first lectureship that they ever had at Freed-Hardeman, which lasted 4 weeks. And I heard some of the great teachers and preachers that we have in the Brotherhood, such as H. Leo Bowles, A.G. Allen, G.K. Wallace, Early Arsenault.
Probably G.C. Brewer.
G.C. Brewer was there, and John T. Lewis from Birmingham, Alabama, and of course Brother Hardeman, Brother Briggins, and many of the other good teachers and preachers that are not around now. But, and then I went back again in 1944. That's about all of the schooling that I had at Freed Hardeman, but I've preached at Benton, filled in for him at Benton. I've preached at Hardin, filled in for him at Hardin. I preached in Union Hill one time, filled in for them when they were in the basement of the present building, and the biggest snow on Easter Sunday I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
That's been a long time ago.
Well, I understand you were back at Benton in 1985 preaching.
Well, yes, I filled in for him this fall one Sunday. Tickled me to death. I was glad to be back there. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I preached at Fire Dealing, Bryceburg, Calvert City, Oak Valley, and Sharp. I've worked regular for that many congregations here in the county, and filled in for some of the others. I filled in even at Hardin.
Well, I heard a fellow say one time, and said, you know, I'm going to give a big compliment to Lake Riley. Said he worked on job, did hard labor, and I want to ask you about that. You worked at some of the plants and maybe TVA and so forth, and he said in working around a lot of the men, he baptized several of them. Said, now you got to be a pretty good fellow to do that.
Well, I worked 30 years on a construction job, and come home, and if it wasn't dark, why, I'd do a little farming.
Mm-hmm.
And then on Sunday, well, I had a preaching appointment.
Mm-hmm.
And I have preached, I've worked on the farm, and done construction work. My first construction job was in 1941. 14th day of April, I went to work for TVA.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you didn't make much money then, but as time went on, why, the wages kept going up, and you made more money on construction, you made more on the farm. And, you know, my first preaching appointment is $5 a Sunday.
Yeah.
I went to Samoth, Illinois once a month.
Mm-hmm.
And one Sunday's raining, WPA rode in there, and I got in over there, just barely slid in, and I waited till about 11:30, and it's still raining hard, nobody come. Well, I decided time to go back home, so I got back home time to go to church at the shop down to Maple Hill,
Mm-hmm.
Sunday evening. Went back next month, the sun was shining, and everybody was there, and I did the best I knew how in preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. And Brother Luge Mobley, I'll never forget, he said, I understand you was here last month. I said, yes, I sure made it over here. Well, he said, we're going to double your pay today, and he gave me $10.
That seemed like a fortune then, didn't it?
The next biggest pay, I guess, was about 1941 or 2. I went to Birmingham, and I preached to Brother Willie Goheen. That is Bob Goheen's father.
Mm-hmm.
Preached at Birmingham. And I came back by Leod, and the children, I believe, stayed all day with Ezra and Ruth. And I came back by there after I preached at Birmingham that morning and night, and Brother Willie, he tied the contribution up in a little rag and then put a string around it, you know, and slipped that in my pocket, and I got over to Ezra's. I had all that money in one of my coat pockets. I said, Ezra, help me count this money. We got it out on the table in county. It's $15, and that was the most money I'd ever seen in my life preaching.
You know, that I wish we had more time. The time slipped up on me. Do you have some kind of a last statement? What about this name, Sharp?
Well, I was born on Benton Route 6, and I still live on Benton Route 6. And I'm the first house in Sharp coming down 68 here. And there's a story that's been handed down to me how Sharp got its name. I understand it was first called Oakland. And there used to be a post office here. There's Oakland Post Office. And whoever the postmaster was, I understand the postal inspector came by and said, now there's another Oakland, Kentucky, somewhere near Bowling Green. And said, you've got to change the name